Hello, in this recording I'm going to explain the concept of equimarginal returns. Now this is quite important for assignment 1, so it will be important to read around this topic if you don't quite grasp everything that I talk about today. So in Sloman and Garrett they actually define equimarginal returns, and they have this referred to it as the equimarginal principle. And they talk about it as being the consumers maximising the total utility from their incomes. Okay, so remember, utility is all about people's satisfaction. So you want to maximise the satisfaction you have from your income. And you do that by consuming a combination of goods. And the idea here is that the ratio of the marginal utilities, marginal utility being the extra bit of satisfaction you gain from consuming a bit more of something, is equal to the ratio of the prices. Okay, now that probably needs a bit more explanation. I've tried to give an example here. So if you imagine two nightclubs in Bournemouth, Halo and Cameo, and when you last went to Halo, it gave you 3 times the additional utility of attending Cameo. Okay, so you got 3 times as much extra satisfaction from going to Halo than you did when you went to Cameo. But Halo cost twice as much as Cameo. Okay, so because you're getting 3 times the extra additional satisfaction, utility, you decide to increase the consumption of Halo even though it costs more. But if you listen to my previous 2 sets of recordings, you'll know that as consumption increases, the actual marginal utility, the extra bit of satisfaction you get, will begin to fall due to diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so there will come a point when the marginal utility of Cameo begins to rise relative to Halo. So, basically what we're doing is weighing up these decisions on cost and, how much we feel we benefit from doing the activity. And obviously we don't do this, in a very formal way. We're doing it kind of in our heads generally with much more of a kind of emotional response. But we are trying to sort of rationally balance out how much we spend on one thing or another. We'll actually go through this in your workbook, has an activity on this, and we will go through this online. So have a go at that workbook activity, exercise 2, and then we'll talk this through next week. So the way this works is we're trying to optimise our distribution of spending. And basically when consumers are making a decision, they're looking at this sort of relative value of money, value for money that we get from things. So this is what's known as the utility price ratio. And, basically the consumer's trying to work out how to get the most satisfaction. And so, as it says there, they spend money so that he or she will not willingly spend a penny more on one good and a penny less on another if that was to reduce his or her overall level of satisfaction. So, that's the theory about it. Obviously, things might not quite work like that for people in practice, but that's what people are trying to do. And over on the right there, you can see there's an equation for this, which is, if we were thinking about it in terms of people's consumption of an event, it would be the marginal utility of event A divided the price of event A should be equal to the marginal utility of event B divided by the price of event B. And this is what people are trying to kind of balance out when they're making consumption decisions about attending 2 events. So just thinking about why this matters, well, marginal utility is quite important because, as it says there, it governs whether you decide to have a little bit more, a little bit less of a particular good or service. So we're making these consumer decisions on this relative value for money. The basis of this is what's known as the utility price ratio. And from this, we can begin to understand various things about consumer decisions, and also begin to think about this from the point of view of provider and, some things that we might need to think about when we're providing an event, and, what we might want to do about our pricing decisions. So, for example, there, in theory, lowering the price increases sales. So remember, there's a link between price and consumption. So we tend to consume more of something if it costs less. But from a point of view of a provider, it might not be the best option. So, as it says there, satisfaction can be added in other ways. So it might be that you actually, do something that improves the experience for people without actually increasing your costs. And, what can happen is actually a lower price can actually signal low quality to people, and therefore low value to people. So, you know, sometimes what we want to do is actually focusing on the value of the experience for our consumers might be a better option, because then consumers will see that there are extra benefits relative to the price. So, you know, we often kind of think about pricing decisions in a slightly different way than, you know, how could we make this cheaper, or being cheap. Also, the other thing that we begin to understand a bit more about is why it's actually difficult to get repeat customers, and why, you know, when you're trying to sell the same thing to customers again and again, it becomes more difficult. And this is, you know, to do with this law of diminishing marginal utility. So, for example, I started going to the New Forest show a few years ago. It's an agricultural show, and I was actually invited the first time to go, and I really enjoyed it. And I came back the following year. And I really enjoyed it. But by the third year, I was beginning to kind of think, okay, this wasn't perhaps quite so good this year. The fourth year, I definitely began to think it wasn't so good. So this is this law of diminishing marginal utility, you know, because I'd had the experience by then, and actually I wasn't so, you know, enamoured with it on the third and fourth time, definitely. And then it didn't happen this summer, but the previous summer I didn't go, on the basis that I thought, no, I've had enough now. So, you know, in you know, sales, they often have tactics like economy packs, which you see in supermarkets, bulk discounts, loyalty points. You know, so for instance, coffee shops use things like loyalty cards to overcome this. And similarly, you might have this with an event venue if you're trying to encourage repeat visitation. So, things for you to do now. One of the things I'd like you to have a look at is assignment 1, and it would be useful if you went and had a read that through. I will actually talk about this in the online lecture in the second week, and it will become a little bit more clear about what that assignment is about over the next couple of weeks. So first of all, have a look at this assignment. You should have a name. Your name should be on a list to tell you which aspect of that assignment to do, or there's one part which is allocated to you by your name. So if your name's not on that list, contact me. If you've really struggled with the concepts in this recording or anything in the first 3 recordings, have a look up the terms in one of the books, and on Brightspace there is a recommended reading list which you will find at the end of the unit guide, but also I've put it in a separate area as well, which will give you some recommended reading on consumer demand and decisions, and I recommend specific textbooks and chapters for you to have a look at. So you just need to go and find that textbook, which you can get at through Brightspace in the reading list link at the top, and then have a read of that chapter.